Hello, my name is Erin Collins. I am in the Doctorate of Education program at Liberty University. I have a cognate in traumatology. Today, we will be focusing on the psychological difficulties and the societal consequences of Caucasian women who have been sexually abused in childhood in the southeastern region of the United States. So, today's presentation we'll review the specific struggle of a traumatized population, the traumatized population. I will also be providing examples of the variables to consider when working with these women, how Christian therapists can apply scriptures to treatment for this population, and highlight the need for future research. There will also be a summarization at the end of the entire presentation. But as a reminder, before the presentation starts, studying trauma is studying the darkness of the world. Psalm 47:8 affirms that God is still on the throne, even in the trauma. And Hebrews 13:8 affirms Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So Christian therapists can take comfort in those affirmations when working with traumatized populations. As arising professionals, we do know what the DSM-5-TR is. We know the PTSD diagnoses. We know all of that. However, it is imperative to understand that trauma exceeds the definition that is on a piece of paper. Panish identified themes from the societal understanding of trauma relating to just a singular traumatic event. So people think of trauma as just like a singular thing, but trauma is more than that. We're going to be broadening that definition and focus on the reaction and succeeding events that occur after the traumatic event, which is still trauma. So, Panish also encourages for clinicians to assess reactions to the traumatic event as well as the patterns observed in their clients when conceptualizing the need for trauma informed care. The understanding of trauma is essential for any clinician in the mental health field. Even if a client has not experienced a singular traumatic event, there's still a high chance that they have a traumatized schema due to developmental trauma they experienced in their upbringing. Levers actually concisely summarize that there's a statistical probability that individuals will experience some form of traumatic exposure during their lifetimes. So the expectation for the client to be traumatized should be more than not when you're working with clients. The topic today is actually based on American women, so the American women population that are Caucasian in ethnicity and live in the southeastern United States. The goal is to explore the long-term psychological difficulties and difficulties in societal functioning, and that has been linked to their childhood sexual trauma. And moving forward, when I'm referring to CST, that is going to be childhood sexual trauma. The women of this population will reside in the age range of 18 to 64. They're married or they've at least been married once, and then they also have children. So the purpose today is to provide details of this population and insight into the difficulties that they face day to day, as well as the risk factors for the urban Southeastern American women and the long-term effects of CST. A great question is, why bother? So CST in Southern Eastern American Caucasian women is an important topic to study due to the prevalence of severity of PTSD diagnoses that are impacting society as a whole. CST is a major public health problem worldwide, and it impairs social functioning, not just on an individual level. So 25% of minors report sexual abuse. And we have to keep in mind that that's just a report that we're aware of. Sexual aggression against children is common in our society. Briere, a researcher, estimated that over 25% of children and adolescents report sexual abuse or sexual assault. Girls and adolescent women are at a higher risk of experiencing CST. Briere also estimated that 18% of adult women have been victimized from CST, so the report comes later on in adulthood. Brown defines CST as anything that is unwanted, coerced sexual body contact before the age of 18. Brown estimated that 1 in 8 girls to 1 in 20 girls experience CST before the age of 14. CST is a form of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Individuals with more than 4 ACEs are 2 to 5 times more likely to experience struggle in physical, mental, social, emotional, cognitive impairments, health risk behaviors, disease, disability, and even early death, according to Dolson. CST directly is linked to adverse adult outcomes, which is the AAOs. And this spans across the physical, mental, social, and life achievement domains that Schuler and Catania report in their research. Specific AAOs include long-term health and sexual health outcomes. So Hashim reports that CSE has a high prevalence globally, not just domestically in the United States. Hashim completed a meta-analysis involving 9.9 million children, showing a 12.7% rate of CST. Multiple meta-analyses have confirmed that the contributing factor of CST has on adult psychopathology, and this includes but is not limited to depression and anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, anger, sex-related behaviors, and then suicidal ideation. Hashim continues that list and found that women with CST also struggle with non-suicidal self-injury, also known as NSSI, substance use, dissociation, eating problems, and then personality pathology. So now that the terminology is handled, our first point of the presentation is the risk factors that married, urban, Caucasian, Southeastern American women have within that age range. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that many children wait to report or never report CST, causing the conundrum of truly identifying the statistics of CST in America. Of the reported cases, 90% of CST is perpetrated by someone known and trusted by the child or the child's family. So CST is underreported and is mainly perpetrated by someone, an adult, that is trusted by not just the child, but the family as a whole. Utilizing North Carolina State Center for Health Statistics, of the 4,362 Caucasian women that were polled within that age range we're studying of 18 to 64, 766 reported to being sexually abused before the age of 18. When you calculate that, means that 17.56% of just the polled population was sexually abused, with the highest occurrence being in the 45 to 54 age range. So that age range had the most childhood sexual abuse. North Carolina's average only falls 0.5% short of the national average that was reported by Breer. Unfortunately, one incident of CST can put a child at increased risk for subsequent sexual victimization. So, with increased incidences of CST, the likelihood of a child reporting the abuse is diminished. Baca actually found that female survivors of CST were more likely to experience sexual trauma in adulthood as well. So then we have the re-victimization and now the re-traumatization. So if a child does report the abuse, so they are reporting it, they're still at risk of being re-traumatized. So re-traumatization is defined as the trauma, distress, and alienation of CST survivor feels when interacting with the medical and legal systems in our country. So the re-victimization happens from other perpetrators, but re-traumatization is actually happening from helpers. Short-term stress and even exposure to acute trauma can generally lead to return functioning without any intervention. But for individuals who have experienced multiple and compounding adverse experiences, the activation of the stress response system in the body is used excessively, which causes the wear and tear for both the brain and body. And this is what leads to toxic stress. So, multiple compounding adverse experiences, and then the wear and tear of the body and brain. So, specifically looking at the Caucasian race of females with CST, Caucasian American women are actually at a higher risk of earlier incident cognitive impairment compared to Black and Hispanic Americans. This cognitive impairment can be represented by short term memory, um, inability to form abstractly conceptualizing thought processes, and attention deficits, and slower processing. Certain subpopulations may even have a higher compounded risk, like women in the southeastern United States, based on the culture. CSD can also have a long term effect on the survivor's own parenting once they become mothers. So, mothers who have experienced CST generally have fewer resources to cope when faced with the challenges of parenting. Mothers that have survived CST are most likely to be impaired in recognizing emotions, impaired in regulating their emotions as well as the child's emotions or children's emotions, and they have less confidence in setting boundaries with their children. Another example of a high risk that occurs in this population is the attainment of HIV or human immunodeficiency virus, and this is usually due to unsafe and ignorant sexual practices. So Brown found four common themes, my bad, not two, four common themes in adults living with HIV in South Carolina. They mostly all have psychological issues, challenges in their relationship. They struggle with self blame, and they often relive their own childhood trauma. So, from the first main point, there are still gaps in literature that need to be acknowledged. There is a lack of feasibility for this population to recover from CST, and the long term psychological effect due to the lack of existing and relevant research. Another gap of research is on the effect of re victimization and how genetic factors have the potential to exacerbate symptoms of CST. So, links to CST and long term psychological effects are continuing to be explored, which is our second main point of the presentation. The three that will be highlighted in this presentation are subjective cognitive decline, the potential of Alzheimer's disease, and negative sexual functioning. So Baden, one of the researchers, identified subjective cognitive decline in adults who experience CST. So subjective cognitive decline was defined as the decrease in one's own cognitive functioning. And this has been linked to CST. So the cognitive decline that has been linked to CST has also been linked to the development of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Um, Alzheimer's Alzheimer's disease and dementia cultivate a loss of independence due to the loss of memory because the brain has been impaired by the trauma. Another form of long term psychological effects can be seen in the overall sexual functioning in these women. Negative sexual functioning for females has been tied to self criticism, which is directly linked to CST. So, the negative schema of self criticism is a common response from childhood sexual trauma. So, with the existence of this negative schema, women who have suffered CST have a diminished capability of having healthy intimacy with others. The diminished capacity for intimacy then diminishes their ability for healthy sexual relationships. So, from the second main point, The gaps in literature that need to be acknowledged include the lack of assessment for warning signs when there is impaired cognitive functioning, and then also availability of interventions to use in combating that cognitive decline once it is identified. So, a variable worthy of discussion when exploring through the psychological difficulties and the societal consequences of Caucasian women with CST is the neurological difference between men and women. Women are at a higher risk than men for development of PTSD because the stress response is actually different in women than men. So a woman's brain holds more endocannabinoid concentrations with which enhances the traumatic response and symptoms. Herring, another researcher, studied the varying neurological response between the two genders at length. So, Herring found that women also have a higher prevalence of risk factors than men by simply being female. Not only are there neurological differences, but life experience is much different between males and females. These epigenetic factors, coupled with the gender disparity of neurodevelopment, creates the higher probability of women to have prolonged stress response. So far, this presentation has reviewed the prevalence of trauma in our world. We've discussed the specific population of the high prevalence CST is experienced by women in the southeastern region of the United States, the difficulties these women face, both cognitively and socially, and recently reviewed the genetic and epigenetic factors that predispose women for prolonged stress. So it leads to the question, where is the hope? Secular research even confirms the efficiency of spiritual integration to the treatment of trauma. Devinck, another researcher, affirmed the ability of meaning making that comes from spiritual integration. And this allows for the cultivation of stability, coherence, purpose, and connection after trauma because of the spiritual integration. Spiritual integration has been proven to assist women in healing from traumatic events all around the world. Research has shown that spirituality is the core to understanding how to address suffering. The first biblical point is that God does not condone rape or sexual abuse. Even in the Old Testament, God was protective of those at risk for sexual abuse. Deuteronomy 22:28 through 29 can be used as an example of the consequences intended for perpetrators of sexual abuse. Uh, Skeptics would say that God rewards the perpetrator, but if we review this scripture through a cultural lens, the interpretation is different. The cultural interpretation is that the perpetrator pays a material penance and then assures that the victim is taken care of because she would be cast out from the Jewish community, deemed unclean otherwise because of the rape or inappropriate sexual contact. The second biblical point is that anyone, including women, can find healing after trauma. In Matthew 11:28 through 29, Jesus is extending an invitation to all who are feeling tired, stressed, and even traumatized to remove the burden from their life. Verse 29 highlights the ability to follow after Jesus, which leads to the ultimate rest for our souls. There are a few topics of future research that needs to be conducted. These include the treatment and understanding of women who have been impacted by CST, design and feasibility of trauma-informed intervention programs, and further exploration of mental health outcomes. So specific treatment models are in need of development that offer longitudinal design in order to establish the relationship between CST and psychopathology. The psychopathology can include anxiety, depression, and negative sexual behaviors. Fruin, another researcher, calls for a better understanding of gender related differences between men and women in relation to violence perpetration and then re victimization, as we discussed earlier. This future research has the potential to be relevant to both prevention and intervention of CST. Brown believed that future research should focus on the mediational pathways between CST and subjective cognitive decline, as subjective cognitive decline has been associated with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, mentioned before. Brown believes that if there is feasibility and acceptability of interventions for healthcare settings, the rates of subjective cognitive decline will decrease, thus decreasing the impact CST has socially. Hall highlighted the importance for research to explore the reactions individuals have with CSD when they have disclosed their abuse. So, Hall believed that negative reactions to disclosure will increase the likelihood of CSD survivors to internalize and externalize the negativity that comes from their abuse and then the negative disclosure of the abuse, and this will end in substance use. So, in conclusion, CST is prevalent and impacts many globally. Women in the southeastern US mirror the national average of CST. Women are impacted physically, psychologically, and socially by CST. CST has the potential to impact parenting, implying the development of generational traumatic patterns. Women have a genetic disposition for experiencing prolonged stress compared to men due to the neurological differences and risk factors of the genders. Then future research calls for more informed treatments for CST, a better understanding of the mechanisms that make women different from men, design and feasibility of interventions for CST, and exploration of survivors' disclosure of the abuse. Above all, the Word is living and God is still on his throne, allowing for true healing to occur from CST. Thank you.